Have you ever wondered why you do things you don't remember deciding? Why your hand reaches for the phone before your mind even admits it's lonely? Why you smile in rooms that make you ache or stay silent when every part of you wants to speak? It feels like choice, but beneath that illusion, something else is moving. Something older than logic, quieter than thought, yet infinitely more powerful. Music? It's the hidden engine of your life, the subconscious, the part of you that breathes when you forget to, that flinches before you can explain why. It remembers every glance, every rejection, every sense of safety or danger. Like a river beneath a frozen surface, it moves to you while your conscious mind walks above, certain it's in control. I think you are deciding who to love, what to fear, how to live. But in truth, those decisions were written long before you could name them. A pianist's fingers move before the mind catches up. A driver reaches home without recalling the turns. The body knows the way because the mind beneath the mind is guiding it. This is the paradox of being human. You are both the captain and the province.com current. You hold the wheel, yet something unseen charts the course. Neuroscientists say up to 95% of your daily behavior is automated, dictated not by awareness, but by the silent network of memories, habits, and emotional codes stored deep within your brain. It's a staggering thought that most of who you are has never been consciously chosen. Imagine walking through a garden you didn't plant. Each flower a memory, each thorn a fear. You keep trimming the edges, trying to control what grows, but the roots lie far below your reach. This is where the subconscious lives, not as an enemy, but as an archivist of everything you've ever felt. It learns what kept you safe and what broke you, then rewrites the rules of your existence around those lessons. It doesn't care about happiness or ambition. It only cares about survival. And so you keep repeating stories that feel familiar, even when they hurt. You chase people who mirror your past. You avoid chances that threaten old definitions of safety. The subconscious whispers, better the pain you know than the unknown that might destroy you. And the conscious mind obeys, believing it has chosen wisely. But beneath all the noise of thought, the subconscious remains vast, ancient, and unfinished. It is both guardian and ghost, shaping the architecture of your preciousness. Every moment, you may believe you are steering the wheel, but perhaps you are merely holding it while something deeper guides the road. And if 90% of who you Popino are lives in silence, then who or what is truly driving your life? Before you ever learned to think, you were already learning to feel. Long before you spoke your first word, the world had already begun writing inside you, not with language, but with tone, rhythm, and silence. A glance that lingered too long, a sigh that meant disapproval, a smile that made you safe for one fleeting second. Your subconscious was the witness to it all, absorbing, shaping, building the hidden architecture of who you'd one day become. Imagine a child sitting in a dimly lit room, clutching a toy for comfort. The air hums with tension, not words, but the weight of them unspoken. The mother's voice is sharp today, her movements quick, her eyes somewhere else. The child learns something crucial, not through explanation, but through vibration. Love can vanish without warning. That lesson doesn't fade when the room quiets down. It sinks deeper, finding a permanent home in the Dowd subconscious. Years later, as an adult, that same child will hesitate before expressing joy, afraid it might invite punishment, or will overcompensate, becoming endlessly accommodating to keep peace alive. Psychologists call this attachment conditioning. The brain, still forming, learns to associate love, with survival. Neural pathways fire and strengthen with every repetition. A raised voice becomes danger, a gentle touch, salvation. According to studies on early development, by age 7, the subconscious mind has already recorded most of its guiding beliefs, not about the world, but about you in the world. Were you safe? Were you seen? Did your feelings matter? Each answer carved a pattern that still plays beneath your plays. Adult thoughts. A little boy praised only when he's silent grows into a man who fears his own voice. A girl who earns affection by being perfect becomes a woman who mistakes exhaustion for worth. These are not choices, they're echoes. The subconscious, in its devotion to your survival, keeps replaying what once kept you safe. It doesn't realize that time has passed, that you've grown, that the threats are gone. To it, you are still that child in the dimly lit room, trying to read love like weather, scanning faces for warmth, adjusting yourself to avoid the storm. The philosopher Alan Watts once said, "We seldom realize, for example, that our most private thoughts and emotions are not actually our own." He was right. They were inherited, shaped by whispers, by footsteps in hallways, by how gently or harshly someone said your name. And so every adult reflex, every hesitation, craving, fear is an unremembered lesson, repeating itself. You are the sum of countless invisible teachings written not in words, but in tone. The subconscious never forgets its first language, emotion, and it speaks through you still, guiding your reactions, protecting you from ghosts that no longer exist. But what happens when the child's rules keep the adult trapped? That's where the mask begins to form, and the next chapter of your mind's hidden story unfolds. You grow up believing you've escaped your past, that you've outgrown it, replaced it, rewritten it with logic, goals, and discipline. But beneath the layers of adulthood, something quieter still moves. The child you once were didn't disappear. It simply learned to wear a better disguise. You call it maturity, responsibility, ambition, but often it's just the mask your subconscious made to keep you safe. You wear it well. At work, it looks like control, the hunger to excel, the need to be useful. In love, it looks like caution, smiling through discomfort, saying you're fine when you're unraveling inside. The subconscious doesn't trust the world with your truth, because once your truth wasn't enough. So it builds armor made of habits. The people pleaser who can't say no. The perfectionist who finds comfort only in exhaustion. The skeptic who holds others at arm's length because trust once drew blood. These masks are not lies. They are survival stories that never ended. Neuroscientists say most of your choices are made before you're even aware of them. The brain, loyal to its past, lights up the same neural circuits that were built in childhood. Familiarity feels like safety even when it hurts. That's why you chase the same kinds of love, the same arguments, the same quiet ache of being unseen. Because pain, when repeated long enough, becomes home. You think you're seeking happiness, but the subconscious seeks only what it recognizes. Picture yourself as a puppet wrapped in golden strings. You move with grace, perform with precision. Believe you're free yet beneath invisible hands tug. The strings are woven from old fears, inherited expectations, and silent promises you made long ago. I will never be a burden. I will never be weak. I will never need too much. The mask keeps you functioning, admired, even loved, but it also keeps you from yourself. You smile, not because you're happy, but because smiling once prevented pain. You strive, not because you desire, but because slowing down feels like danger. Philosophers call it the tragedy of self-forgetting. When the person you became is only the echo of who you had to be. You try to control everything around you because deep down you still remember the chaos you couldn't control. And the more tightly you grip your world, the more you realize that control is just another mask for fear. There comes a moment, subtle, quiet, when you feel the strings pull tighter. You sense something inside you, resisting, whispering that this performance isn't freedom, it's repetition. And maybe that's the beginning of awakening. When the puppet finally senses the hands beneath and wonders, what if I'm not the one moving? Soon, you'll look beneath the surface and discover how deeply those unseen strings are wired into your mind, not by fate, but by design. I think you're awake, that every thought, every reaction, every decision is born in the light of awareness. But the truth is unsettling. By the time you realize you've made a choice, your brain already made it for you. In a laboratory, milliseconds before you decide to lift your hand, electrodes light up in the motor cortex, the body preparing to act before the mind believes it's in control. Neuroscience calls it preconscious processing. Philosophy calls it fate written in neurons. Your subconscious is not a vague idea. It's a living system older than your reasoning mind. It hides in the folds of the brain's oldest structures. The limbic system, where emotion outweighs logic, and the basal ganglia, where repetition becomes ritual. These regions don't speak in words or plans. They speak in sensation, in impulse, in the quiet tug of what feels right or wrong. Every time you pull away from a stranger's glare or reach for the same brand of coffee without thinking, that's the subconscious guiding, protecting, repeating. Freud imagined it as an iceberg, a small, visible tip floating above an enormous mass of unseen influence. Jung took it deeper, calling it the personal unconscious, a reservoir of forgotten memories and ancestral patterns that whisper through dreams and coincidences. Modern psychology renames it automatic processing, but the principle hasn't changed. What you think of as personality is often a choreography of old data, learned associations, sensory fragments, reflexive loops. Your brain collects millions of impressions each day. Only a handful ever reach awareness. The rest become the background music of your life, shaping how you love, what you fear, who you trust. And yet, science struggles to measure what the heart already knows. There's no instrument precise enough to capture the way a mother's sigh can become a lifelong definition of safety. No brain scan can decode why the smell of rain reminds you of someone you've tried to forget. The subconscious speaks through poetry, not equations, through dreams, slips of the tongue, and the soft unease that rises when truth approaches. You are both the scientist and the experiment, studying your own depths while being shaped by them. Knowledge helps, but it's not enough. Understanding the subconscious is like mapping an ocean while standing on its surface. You can trace its currents, name its tides, but until you dive beneath, until you feel what moves, you remain at the mercy of its silence. Because knowledge of the subconscious is not power, awareness is. And to become aware is to step into a realm where the mind stops pretending to lead and begins to listen. What happens when the mind hides from itself? When everything you've buried begins to breathe beneath the floorboards of your placed cade. Consciousness. You may call it bad luck, self-sabotage, or coincidence. But the truth is quieter, darker. It's the return of what you've refused to feel. The subconscious doesn't forget. It waits. Every fear you've avoided, every emotion you've suppressed becomes part of the shadow that follows you, patiently reshaping your life until you finally turn to face it. You see it in the small tragic patterns. The person who keeps falling for the same kind of lover, each one wearing a different face, but offering the same ache. The man who fears rejection, yet builds walls so high no one can reach him. The woman who wants peace, but can't live without chaos. These are not accidents. They are emotional repetitions. The subconscious trying to resolve an old wound by recreating it. Psychology calls it repetition compulsion. The drive to relive pain until the lesson is finally learned. But the subconscious doesn't use words. It speaks in habits, cravings, and catastrophes. Carl Jung called this hidden realm the shadow. The parts of yourself you've exiled: anger, envy, need, vulnerability, everything that didn't fit the image you were praised for. You learned early what was acceptable, and the rest you pushed into the dark. But what's suppressed doesn't die. It mutates. It leaks out as passive aggression, emotional numbness, or sudden rage you can't explain. You dream of drowning, being chased, losing teeth, all symbols of the same truth. Something inside you is trying to surface. Neuroscience offers a parallel. Repressed memories still light up in the place. Amygdala, the brain's emotional alarm system. They live like ghosts in the crom, wiring dormant until triggered. That's why a scent, a tone of voice, a single phrase can unravel you without warning. You think you're reacting to the present, but you're reliving the past. Your subconscious doesn't distinguish between memory and reality. It only knows survival. And so when you refuse to face your pain finds ways to face you. Through anxiety that has no clear cause, through relationships that mirror your deepest insecurities, through the strange recurring feeling that you're living the same story again and again, just with different names. The subconscious becomes a haunted basement. Every door you lock rattles in the dark until it's opened. Jung once wrote, "Until you make the unconscious conscious, it will direct your life, and you will call it fate." The shadow is not evil. It's exiled truth. It only becomes a monster when ignored. But facing it demands courage to descend into yourself, to meet the part of you you've tried to live without. Because the moment you stop running from the detectors, dark, you realize it was never chasing to you. It was calling you home. And in that descent, you begin to see how even the darkness was designed to bring you back to wholeness. Have you ever wondered if your thoughts are truly your own? The shows you watch, the words you quote, use, the dreams you chase, how much of them were chosen, and how much were whispered into you by a world that never stops talking. The subconscious mind doesn't live in isolation. It breathes with the culture around it. Every billboard, every sermon, every trending phrase slips beneath awareness, rewriting your inner code, one repetition at a time. You think you're deciding, but most of the time you're remembering what the world told you to want. Since childhood, you've been surrounded by invisible teachers. Television taught you beauty. Religion taught you guilt. Language taught you what could and could not be felt. Before you ever had a chance to define meaning, meaning was defined for you. Studies in cognitive science show that the human brain is a pattern-seeking machine. It learns through imitation and repetition. So, when society repeats a symbol long enough, the cross, the dollar sign, the flawless face, it becomes sacred in the subconscious, no longer questioned, only obeyed. You grow up chasing not truth, but belonging. Advertising understands this better than philosophy ever did. It doesn't sell a product. It sells identity. A car isn't transportation, it's status. A brand isn't clothing, it's validation. The subconscious, wired for emotional association, absorbs the symbolism until desire feels like instinct. The mind believes possession equals peace because it has been conditioned to. You buy not because you want, but because you've been taught that wanting means existing. And then there are the myths we inherit. Ancestral fears pass through generations. Fear of rejection, of otherness, of questioning authority. The crowd carries them like echoes, binding individuals into one collective dream. Psychologists call it the collective, unconscious. The shared imagery and emotion that move through humanity like an undercurrent. You see it in politics, in religion, in social movements. Entire groups moved, not by logic, but by emotion, mirroring one another like synchronized mirrors. It feels safe to placed in, quote, belong to the trance because solitude feels like death to the social mind. Language itself becomes a cage. The words available to you define what you can think, what you can express, even what you can feel. A culture obsessed with productivity breeds people who apologize for resting. A culture built on competition teaches you to measure your worth by your reflection in another's eyes. Slowly, your subconscious trades freedom for approval and calls it morality. But true awakening doesn't begin in rebellion. It begins in recognition. To wake up is not to fight the spell, but to see it, to realize that the voices shaping your calm mind were never meant to destroy you, only to keep you safe within the wano, familiar. Yet safety is not the same as freedom, and only when you see the trance clearly can you begin to ask the question that terrifies every system built to contain you. What if I stopped obeying? There comes a point in your life when everything looks right from the outside. The job, the relationship, the rhythm of productivity. Yet, something inside you feels quietly wrong. You wake up each morning and move through the day like an actor who's forgotten why the play began. The applause still comes, but it no longer means anything. Beneath the noise of achievement, there's a hum, soft, constant, inignorable, a question that no success can silence. Why does all this still feel empty? When you live cut off from your subconscious, you become a big stranger to yourself. You keep doing, achieving, proving, but without connection to the roots of feeling. Every victory turns hollow. Neuroscience calls it emotional dissonance. The gap between what you show and what you feel. You smile while your nervous system screams. You say yes while your body tightens in refusal. This split becomes a kind of spiritual paralysis. You function, but you no longer feel. You've seen it before. The executive who can't stop checking emails at midnight even as his heart races for no reason. The woman who keeps falling in love with the same kind of absence. A face, a voice, a promise that always fades. The artist who creates endlessly but can't stand to be alone with what he's made. They all share the same wound. A life built on performance instead of presence. When the subconscious, that quiet keeper of truth, is buried, the conscious mind becomes a frantic replacement, trying to fill the silence with noise. Psychologists describe it as fragmentation. The self divided between the one who feels and the one who pretends not to. Over time, this split breeds chronic anxiety, burnout, and numbness. The brain, trapped in survival mode, forgets how to rest. You begin to confuse tension for passion, exhaustion for purpose. Even love becomes mechanical gestures, without intimacy, words without soul. The subconscious keeps sending signals, dreams that ache, mistakes that repeat, relationships that collapse under familiar weight, but you interpret them as bad luck, never realizing their cries for integration. There's a moment late, at night, maybe when the lights are low, and the world has stopped expecting things from you. When the illusion cracks, you feel it then, the quiet ache beneath the surface, the truth you've avoided behind the busyness. You realize you've mistaken stillness for weakness, numbness for strength, and survival for peace. This is the real cost of disconnection. To spend years building a life that impresses everyone, except the one living it. We call it adulthood, but it's often just adaptation. We call it maturity, but it's exhaustion in disguise. Somewhere along the way, you stopped chasing wholeness and started chasing state, approval, and forgot what it feels like to belong to yourself. And yet, in that realization lies the first crack of awakening, the beginning of a return. At some point, the war inside you becomes too exhausting to keep fighting. You realize the mind you've been trying to conquer was never your enemy. It was your child abandoned in a dark room, waiting to be heard. The subconscious doesn't respond to control. It responds to attention. And healing begins the moment you stop demanding it to change and start listening to what it's been trying to tell you all along. You start small. You sit in silence one morning, and instead of drowning in distraction, you let the thoughts come strange, unfiltered, disjointed. The worries, the memories, the things you thought you'd outgrown, they rise, like sediment stirred from the bottom of Kroos. Still water. You breathe. You don't run. This is mindfulness, not the polished version taught in apps and retreats, but the raw practice of witnessing your own chaos without turning away. Neuroscientists have found that when you observe your thoughts without judgment, the brain's amygdala, the fear center, begins to quiet. Awareness itself becomes medicine. At night, you begin to dream again. The images are strange but familiar. A locked door, a forgotten friend, a voice that calls your name from a distance. You write them down in a notebook, realizing each dream is a letter from the subconscious. In psychology, they call this integration, bridging the conscious and unconscious so that your inner world no longer feels divided. You start speaking to the child you once were, the one who learned to hide her anger, the one who mistook fear for obedience. It feels awkward at first, almost foolish. But something in you softens as if an ancient truth recognizes itself. Working with the subconscious isn't about fixing what's broken. It's about remembering what was silenced. You begin to repattern belief through small rituals, not affirmations of false positivity, but honest statements of possibility. I am allowed to rest. I can be loved without performing. Slowly, these words stop sounding foreign. The brain's neural pathways, once carved by trauma, start to rewrite themselves through repetition and emotional safety. Healing, neuroscience reminds us, is not a moment of revelation, but a process of rewiring. And perhaps the most profound realization comes when you stop trying to descend into the subconscious and allow yourself to dive. The deeper you go, the lighter you become. What once felt like drowning begins to feel like returning to the self beneath the noise, to the quiet intelligence of your own psyche. The subconscious ceases to be a monster in the basement and becomes a collaborator, a pulse that guides you back toward wholeness. Because the goal was never to silence the depths of your mind. It was to hear them clearly enough to finally rise, not as the version of you that survived, but as the one who remembers why. What if the thing had been searching for has been looking through your eyes all along? The subconscious isn't buried beneath you, like some dark secret. It lives inside you, woven through every breath, every hesitation, every choice you can't explain. It is the ocean beneath your ship, the night that makes the stars visible. You've spent your life trying to conquer it, to label it, to rise above it, not realizing that without it, there would be no you at all. Close your eyes for a moment. Listen to the faint rhythm beneath your thoughts. the pulse of something ancient and alive. That is not noise. That is memory. Every kindness, every wound, every silence, you've endured lives there, moving quietly through the corridors of your mind. Freud called it the unconscious. Jung called it the shadow. But both were describing the same thing, the hidden architecture of being human. It is not evil, not divine, but something more mysterious. The mirror of everything you have forgotten about yourself. The philosopher Alan Watts once said that we are the universe, looking back at itself, consciousness folded into form. When you meet your subconscious, you are not descending into darkness. You are returning to source. Each dream, each impulse, each whisper of intuition is your deeper self, speaking through the language of symbol and emotion. Science can scan the brain's activity, map its synapses, even predict your next decision 2 milliseconds before you make it. But no, machine has yet found the place where your fears turn into metaphors, or where your love remembers its first shape. That is the territory of mystery, the place where psychology meets the soul. You've spent years trying to control life, to outthink pain, to stay afloat above what you can't name. But maybe control was never the goal. Maybe awareness is. The subconscious doesn't need to be defeated. It needs to be heard. When you stop fighting it, you begin to see it for what it really is. A mirror that reflects not who you pretend to be, but who you've always been beneath the noise. You begin to understand that the mind is not divided between light and dark, but endlessly, cycling like day becoming night, like tides pulling back only to return. And perhaps that's the greatest secret of all, that the mind's deepest mystery isn't what it hides, but that it keeps dreaming of becoming whole. Each thought, each emotion, each mistake is the psyche's way of remembering itself. The subconscious is not your shadow, it's your map home. So the next time you find yourself lost in thought, haunted by what you don't understand, pause. Don't run. Look into that quiet, infinite mirror within. Because what you'll see, there is not the stranger you feared, but the self that has been waiting patiently for you to return.